Is Soul Knight Prequel dying? Is there going to be a Season 4? And if so, what's the new class? Today, we'll be addressing these burning questions. But first, let's rewind to the very beginning of this game's journey. When Soul Knight Prequel dropped on November 24th, the excitement was through the roof. Fans of the original Soul Knight had been waiting eagerly for any news about the prequel, and when it finally launched, it felt like the entire community was ready to dive into a brand new experience. But why was Soul Knight Prequel such a big deal? Well, the original Soul Knight had already established itself as a legend in the mobile gaming world. The fast-paced action, roguelike mechanics, and endless variety of weapons created a game that was hard to put down. With millions of downloads worldwide, Soul Knight became a fan favorite due to its addictive gameplay. So when the prequel was announced, expectations were incredibly high. The developers introduced a new game, with better graphics, new characters, more challenging bosses, and, of course, a wider selection of weapons. For many, it felt like the evolution of a classic, taking everything we loved from Soul Knight and improving on it. On launch day, the player base exploded, with millions of players jumping in to see what the game had to offer. The visuals were crisp, the combat felt smooth, and there were so many new bosses and enemies that even veterans of the original game had to explore and enjoy. The initial reception was overwhelmingly positive. Players were buzzing about the changes, sharing their favorite moments, and dissecting the new features. Soul Knight Prequel seemed poised to not just live up to its predecessor, but maybe even surpass it. That golden period didn't last long. Shortly after launch, Soul Knight Prequel hit its first major roadblock, and its name was Aeron. For those of you who aren't familiar, Aeron was essentially a game-breaking bug that made playing the game an absolute nightmare. Imagine booting up the game, getting ready to dive into action, only to have an error pop up after just a few seconds. And it wasn't just the occasional glitch. Aeron was relentless. Aeron wasn't a bug, but was the result of the server being unable to sustain the community. It was widespread, and it essentially broke the game for almost everyone. The entire community was vocal about the issue, with frustrated players taking to social media to vent. Memes were flying around, showcasing players' short-lived excitement, quickly followed by disappointment. Some players even made light of it, joking that Aeron was the toughest boss in the game, because you couldn't beat him. But here's where things took a turn for the worse. While the developers were eventually able to fix the issue, the damage had already been done. The game's popularity, which had soared to millions of players, suddenly plummeted. Many players simply gave up after being unable to play for so long, and others just moved on to different games during the downtime. The fix came too late for a lot of the player base, and those that left never really heard that the issue was resolved. The result? A huge drop in the player count. From several million active players, Soul Knight Prequel was now struggling to hold on to a few 100,000. And though the game was technically playable again, the momentum it had built was gone. Players had lost faith. Even after the game was fixed, the excitement never fully recovered. Sure, when new seasons launched, there would be a brief spike in interest. For 2-3 weeks, players would jump back in to check out the new content, new bosses, new weapons, and especially new classes. But the problem was, once the initial hype wore off, things would quickly fall back into the same pattern. Season 2, however, was a bit of an exception. It was by far the most popular, and for good reason. The classes introduced in Season 2 were some of the coolest we had ever seen in the game. Players were hooked again, at least for a while. But even then, the excitement couldn't sustain itself. By the time mid-season rolled around, interest had dropped once again, and players were moving on to other games. Now, this leads us to the present day. Is Soul Knight Prequel dying? Based on the numbers, I'm sad to say, it looks like it might be. While the game still has a dedicated fan base, the hype just isn't there anymore. The mid-season updates are no longer enough to keep players engaged, and the excitement is at an all-time low. So, is Soul Knight Prequel really dying? Or could a potential Season 4 bring the game back to life? This is the big question on everyone's mind. Unfortunately, there hasn't been any official confirmation from the developers about whether or not we're getting a Season 4. And to be honest, the silence is worrying. In the past, we've seen hints and leaks before new seasons dropped, but right now, nothing. That silence has left the community in limbo, and players are unsure if they should hold on for a revival or move on for good. This uncertainty is part of why the player base is shrinking. Without anything exciting to look forward to, even the most loyal players are starting to lose interest. But let's talk about the possibility of a Season 4. What would it take for Soul Knight Prequel to make a comeback? First, new content is a must. And I'm not talking about minor updates or bug fixes. Players need something big, something that will shake up the gameplay and reignite the excitement that surrounded the game at launch. A new class could be a game changer. If there's one thing that has consistently brought players back to Soul Knight Prequel, it's been the introduction of new, unique classes. Season 2's classes were a huge hit, and I think a fresh, creative class with innovative abilities could be the spark the game needs. Imagine a class with skills that completely change how we approach combat. But that might not be enough on its own. There's another big piece missing, a sense of progression. Right now, Soul Knight Prequel feels like it's running in place. Players need more than just new weapons or bosses. They need a reason to invest time in the game long term. Perhaps a new class system could be introduced, where players can mix and match abilities to create their own playstyle, or a revamp of the current progression system to keep things fresh and rewarding. That could be the kind of content that keeps players coming back week after week. Another sign of the game's decline is the disappearing content creators. For a while, the Soul Knight Prequel content creation scene was thriving. Channels like Jeji, myself, and many others were regularly producing videos, keeping the community engaged with class guides, gameplay highlights, and theory crafting around upcoming seasons. But now, it feels like a ghost town. With no new class leaks or exciting information to share, even the most dedicated creators are finding it hard to stay motivated. When there's no fresh content to discuss, creators naturally turn to other games, which only adds to the game's downfall. You've probably noticed that I haven't been as active with Soul Knight Prequel content lately, and it's because there just isn't much to talk about. But I haven't given up hope yet. Like many of you, I believe there's still a chance for the game to bounce back. And even though I don't have concrete information to share about Season 4, I do have some ideas. In my next video, I plan to introduce a completely made-up class, something that I think would shake up the game and make it fun again. I might even make predictions about when we could expect Season 4 to drop, based on the patterns from previous seasons. So, is Soul Knight Prequel dying? Well, the numbers don't lie. The game is definitely struggling. But does that mean it's the end? Not necessarily. There's still potential for a revival, and I think we all know how quickly things can change in the world of gaming. A fresh new season, a game-changing update, or even just a surprise announcement could bring players flocking back. And that's where you come in. If you're as curious as I am about what the future holds for Soul Knight Prequel, make sure you stick around. In my next video, I'll be diving into a class concept I've come up with that could inject new life into the game. Think of it as a completely made-up class. Who knows, maybe the devs will take inspiration and make it a reality. I'll also be predicting when Season 4 could drop, based on the timing of previous seasons and updates. And who knows, by the time that video is out, we might even have some leaks or new information to discuss. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, especially as we continue to cover Soul Knight Prequel and any future developments. Let me know in the comments if you think Soul Knight Prequel can bounce back, or if there's a class or feature you'd like to see in Season 4. I always love reading your ideas. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.